young person. Let's go back to the other end of the spectrum. The superstar Olympian, like the Russian skater, who was extraordinary. At 15, there were many commentators who said, at 15, she can't possibly be held responsible because she's being given substances by coaches, by nutritionists, by others around her, by her entourage. Where do you come out on this issue and how that should be dealt with?
I will respond to you in general terms because the case is still pending and obviously I can't comment on the specifics. But we, in our rules, in the World Anti-Doping Code, which is the legal framework for all of that, we've taken into account the fact that there are young athletes who are getting to the top levels, and that should be treated differently. So we have rules for what we call protected people, and it's young athletes, but it could be people who have mental health problem or something. There's a definition of protected people, but typically in this case, we certainly agree that the responsibility of a 14-year-old is very different than the responsibility of a Lance Armstrong, and that she's not been doing that alone. It's for granted. Now there is an anti-doping component to that, which is how can you mitigate the consequences? What will be the requirements for her to prove that she did, it was a mistake or someone gave it to her and so on. And all this is taken into account into the rules and will be looked at in a case like that. There's another responsibility in a case like that, which is the one of sports, not of anti-doping, which is, do you need an age limit for young athletes? Because when you put an athlete, a 14 years old, to compete like that in a competition with more senior people, obviously there is also a question of fairness to the others and equality. Because if you treat the minor with a lot more lenient rule, but they are competing in the same arena than the other says, well, hey, it's a little too easy for this one because she can claim I'm 14 years old, therefore it's not my fault, but she's part of the same competition. So there's also a question for sports to say, well, where do you set the age limit in your sport? And is it normal to put the pressure on a 14 years old that you can have in the Olympics? Is it reasonable?
I particularly worry about the fact that the age seems to be getting younger and younger. Yeah. And the ability to handle the pressure, as you say. I mean, we all know that pressure is something that drives unethical behavior in all kinds of arenas, from the business world to sports to science, etc. But it is very worrisome to see the kind of pressure that these very young athletes are under.
On that topic, I think I'd like to have one thing. It shows the importance to have very strict rule on the entourage of the athlete, because the abuse on the athletes, whether it's doping or other sort of abuse, and it can be mental or physical, but mental abuse, obviously the young athlete needs to be more protected than the other. And certainly, I think the rule on the entourage is very important. For us in anti-doping, it is a priority to look at the entourage. For example, in a case like the one we just talked about, there's a mandatory provision in our code for an investigation to be conducted on the entourage when you have a case on a minor. So in this case, for example, an investigation has been launched to try to see who is around her, what did they do, what are they responsible for, and it will be a full investigation.
That's critically important. I mean, and also how she got the substances.
Yeah,
who told her to do what? I mean, no 15-year-old is going to have access on their own to ban substances, in theory.
Absolutely. And I would add one more thing. This is public information, so I can say it. But in this particular case, this young athlete, 14 years old, is taking 3 different substances for heart. And 2 of them are not prohibited because they are not deemed to meet the criterion of the list. One of them was prohibited and was detected by the lab. But you start wondering why at 14 years old you are taking 3 of this kind of medicine. And that's the whole question of the entourage. How can you let a 14 years old, maybe if she has a heart problem, then maybe there's a question as to whether she should be where she is. And if not, how come you have 3 of this kind of medicine when you have a 14-year-old athlete? So this really raises serious question of also medical ethics. Who is following a girl like that from a medical perspective and is allowing for medication to be given? These are medications for old people. There is a true question in terms of how does the medical practice goes with, elite sport? Of course, they are special, they are more extreme in the way they solicit their bodies and so on. But you also have to find the right balance. Can you use medical treatments to push the human body to an upper limit? Is that ethical, frankly?
Right. We talked earlier about how the anti-doping ethical questions link up with other areas of society, how developed a country is, resources, etc. This is another way that the ethics of sport links up with other kinds of ethics. In general, I don't believe in ethical silos. And in almost every case, when we look at something, whether it's politics or sports or whatever, it's linked up to ethics in other areas of society. And the one you raise is particularly troubling because we as a society need to be able to trust that medical professionals have the best interest, particularly of children, at heart. Let me ask